My name is Ibrahim Traoré. I stand before you today not only as the president of Burkina Faso, but as a man who has seen something I cannot explain away with politics, power, or reason. I speak now because silence is no longer an option. I know who is watching. I know that beyond this camera, beyond the reach of national television in my country, there are people in distant lands, especially in the United States, who have lived long enough to recognize truth when it carries the weight of something deeper than opinion. This is not a speech. This is not a message crafted by advisors. This is a testimony. I was born in a place where survival was not guaranteed, where opportunity was not something you planned for, it was something you prayed for. In Burkina Faso, in the soil of Africa, I grew up watching children walk miles for water that was not clean, for schools that did not always exist, for futures that were already limited before they even began. We were not poor because we lacked strength. We were not behind because we lacked intelligence. We were forgotten. And there is a difference. You may have heard Africa described in many ways: developing, struggling, unstable. But rarely have you heard it described by those who live inside it. Rarely has the world paused long enough to listen. Do you know what it feels like to have your story told by someone else? To have decisions about your future made in rooms you have never entered? To feel that the color of your skin, the land of your birth, silently closes doors you never even knew existed? I have lived that reality, and I have watched others fall under its weight, not because they were weak, but because they were never given a fair chance to stand. Mothers burying children without answers. Fathers working until their bodies break, yet never escaping the same cycle. Dreams dying quietly before they even have a name. So when I tell you that what I am about to share is not political, you must understand that it comes from something much deeper. It comes from pain, from history, from truth. On the 14th day of November, in the year 2023, everything changed. Not just for me, but for what I now understand about life, death, and the unseen forces that shape our world. I do not ask you to believe me. Belief is not something I can demand. But I will ask you one thing. If a man stands before you, one who has crossed the line between life and death, and returned not for power, not for influence, but to speak for those who have been unheard for far too long, do you have the courage to listen until the end? If you do, then stay with me. Because what comes next is not something I ever intended to tell, but it is something I was told I must. The day began like any other. That is the part that still disturbs me the most. There was no warning, no voice in my mind, no sign in the sky, only routine. The kind of routine that gives a man the illusion that he is still in control of his own life. It was the 14th day of November in the year 2023 in Ouagadougou. The air was warm, steady, familiar. I had meetings scheduled, security briefings, the endless rhythm of leadership that leaves little room for reflection. When you are in power, you are always moving, always deciding, always surrounded, and yet never truly prepared. I remember walking into the compound that morning with the same awareness I always carried. A leader in my position does not forget the risks. You learn to live with them. You accept that somewhere, someone is always planning something. But acceptance is not the same as readiness. And that morning, I was not ready. It happened in less than 10 seconds. 7 gunshots, sharp, violent, unmistakable, the kind of sound that does not belong in conversation, but in war. The first shot did not register as pain. It was confusion, a disruption, a tearing of reality. Then the second, the third. By the fourth, my body was no longer responding the way I commanded it to. Everything became distant, as if I had been pushed backward inside my own mind. There is something I need you to understand. When death comes suddenly, it does not always feel like what you imagine. There was no dramatic final thought, no long reflection on my life, no speech forming in my mind. There was only separation. By the 7th shot, I was already falling. Not just physically, something deeper had already begun to disconnect. I remember the ground, the texture of it, the way it rushed toward me, then disappeared. And then, silence. Not silence as in the absence of sound, but silence as in the absence of everything. No pain, no fear, no urgency, just a complete and total stillness. And then something impossible happened. I saw my own body, not in a dream, not in imagination. I saw it as clearly as I see you now, lying on the floor, motionless, surrounded by chaos. Men shouting, feet moving quickly, hands reaching, and yet I was not among them. I was above, watching, detached. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to no longer be inside my own body. There were 3 military doctors. I remember them clearly. Their movements were urgent, practiced. One was performing chest compressions, another preparing equipment, the third shouting instructions that echoed without reaching me. I watched as they fought for a man who, in that moment I realized, was me, and yet I felt nothing. No connection, no pain from the bullets, no fear of dying, only a strange, overwhelming calm. It is difficult to explain, because everything you have ever been taught tells you that death is terrifying, that the body fights, that the mind resists. But in that moment, there was no resistance, only release. I understood something without being told. The body is not who we are. It is only where we stay. And I was no longer there. Time did not feel the same. I cannot tell you how long I watched. Seconds, minutes. It did not matter, because time itself seemed to lose its meaning. The doctors continued, pressing, shouting, refusing to give up, but I was already gone. My heart, as I would later be told, had stopped. For 2 hours and 13 minutes. That is what the medical report would say. 2 hours and 13 minutes. But where I was, time did not exist in numbers, only in transitions. I remember thinking, if it can even be called thinking, that something was about to happen. Not fear, not anticipation, just awareness. As if I was standing at the edge of something vast, something unknown, and then without warning, everything changed again. The place where I hovered, the room, the doctors, my body on the floor, it all began to fade. Not like a light turning off, but like a world dissolving, and I was no longer looking down. I was being pulled, drawn into something I could not resist, something that did not ask for permission. That was the moment I realized this was not the end. It was the beginning of something else, something I was not prepared to face, but something I could not escape. And what came next is something no human language can fully contain. When the room disappeared, I did not fall. I did not walk. I did not choose a direction. I was taken. There is no other way to describe it. One moment, I was watching the last fragments of my physical world dissolve. The next, I was moving, if moving is even the right word, through something that had no clear beginning and no visible end. A tunnel. That is the closest comparison the human mind can accept. But even that word is too small, because this was not a structure made of walls or material. It was made of light, a light so intense that it should have blinded me. And yet, I could see, a light that carried warmth, but not heat. A light that did not shine from a source, but seemed to exist everywhere at once. I was being pulled into it at a speed I cannot measure, faster than anything I had ever experienced, faster than thought, faster than time itself. And yet, I felt no wind, no pressure, no resistance, only a smooth, unstoppable motion forward. There was no fear. That is something I need you to understand clearly, because many people imagine that in such a moment, the mind would panic, that it would fight, that it would search for control. But there was none of that. Only a quiet awareness, as if something inside me already knew this was meant to happen. The deeper I was pulled into the light, the less I could feel the idea of a body. At first, I still had some sense of myself, a memory of who I was, my name, my identity. But even those began to loosen, not disappear completely, but soften, as if they were no longer the center of my existence. There was no up, no down, no left or right, no sense of distance, no sense of time passing. If you asked me how long I was there, I could not answer, because time did not move. It did not flow. It did not exist. There was only presence. And within that presence, there was sound. At first, it was faint, almost like a distant echo. But as I moved deeper, it grew. Not louder in the way sound becomes painful, but fuller, richer, more complete. It was not a single voice. It was many, millions perhaps. And yet, they were not separate. They were united, blended together into something that felt like one continuous expression. Imagine hearing countless voices at once and understanding all of them perfectly. Not through language, not through words, but through meaning. That is what it was. It was as if every voice carried a piece of something greater, and together, they formed a message that I could feel, even if I could not fully translate it. There was no chaos in those voices, no confusion, only harmony, perfect harmony. That is something I have never experienced in the world of the living, because here, even when people speak the same language, they do not always understand each other. But their understanding did not require translation. It simply existed. And within that harmony, I began to feel something else. A presence, not yet visible, not yet defined, but undeniable. It was ahead of me, waiting. The closer I moved toward the end of the tunnel, the stronger that presence became. Not threatening, not overwhelming, but powerful in a way that made everything else feel small, insignificant. It was not power as we understand it in the world. Political power, military strength, influence. This was something far beyond that. This was authority, truth, something absolute. And as I moved closer, I realized something that I cannot explain logically. I was not just being pulled toward the light, I was being drawn toward purpose. As if everything that had happened in my life, every decision, every struggle, every moment had led to this point. And now, I was about to understand why. There was no turning back. Not because I was forced, but because I no longer had the desire to return. The world I had left behind already felt distant, almost like a memory that no longer held weight. I did not think about my position, my country, my responsibilities. None of that mattered in that moment, because something greater was unfolding, something that made all of those things feel temporary, secondary. As I reached what I can only describe as the end of the tunnel, the light intensified. It expanded, it opened, and then I saw it. Not clearly, not in detail, but enough to know I was no longer alone. There was something there, something waiting, and in that instant, I understood that everything I had experienced so far was only the beginning, because what I was about to encounter next would change everything I thought I knew about existence. As I reached the end of what I can only call the tunnel, everything slowed. Not in time, but in sensation. The movement that had carried me forward with unstoppable force began to soften, as if I were being gently placed into a space that did not belong to the world I had known. The light did not disappear. It expanded. It surrounded me completely. And within that vast brightness, there was a form. At first, I could not understand what I was seeing. Not because it was hidden, but because it was too pure to be recognized by the way human eyes are trained to see. There was no clear outline, no defined edges, no face I could describe, and yet it was unmistakably present. A being, not human, not anything I had ever encountered before, but real, more real than anything I had ever known. The light that surrounded it was not separate from it. It was the being itself, living, moving, aware. And as I became fully aware of its presence, something happened that I was not prepared for. I felt completely seen, not seen the way people look at you, not judged, not observed, but known. Every part of me, every thought I had ever had, every decision I had ever made, every moment I had forgotten, it was all open. There was nothing hidden, nothing I could protect, nothing I could explain away, and yet there was no shame, no fear, no condemnation, only a deep, overwhelming sense of peace, a peace so complete that it made everything I had ever called peace in my life feel like an illusion. I did not speak. I did not need to, because before any thought could form, the being already understood. Communication did not happen through words. It happened instantly, directly, as if meaning itself was being transferred without the need for language. I remember wanting to ask a question, not with my voice, but with my awareness. What is this? But before that question could fully exist, I already knew the answer. Not in words, but in understanding. This was not a place. This was not a dream. This was reality, at a level I had never touched before. And the being before me was not just an observer. It carried authority, not the authority of command or control, but the authority of truth, absolute truth. I tried to focus on its form, to understand it. But the more I tried, the more I realized that it was not meant to be understood in physical terms. It did not have a face, yet it felt familiar. It did not have a body, yet it felt complete. It did not move, yet it was alive in every direction. And then, something changed. The space between us, if it can even be called space, closed. Not physically, but in awareness. And I felt something that I had never felt before in my entire life. Total acceptance. Not because of what I had done, not because of who I had become, but simply because I existed. There was no condition, no requirement, no expectation, just acceptance. And in that acceptance, I began to understand something that is very difficult to bring back into words. Everything we chase in life, power, recognition, control, it is all driven by a need to feel that we matter, to feel that we are seen, that we are enough. But in that presence, all of that disappeared. Because I already was, without proving anything, without achieving anything. I simply was. And that was enough. The being did not speak, but I began to feel something being revealed, not shown visually, but made known. It was as if layers of understanding were being opened inside me, truths that had always existed, but had never been accessible. I realized something in that moment. This presence was not separate from what we call life. It was the source of it, the origin, the beginning. And yet it was also beyond beginning, beyond time, beyond anything that can be measured. I did not feel small in its presence. That is important, because you might expect that standing before something so powerful would make a person feel insignificant, but it did not. It made me feel aligned, as if I had been out of place my entire life and had finally returned to where I belonged. There was no fear of judgment, no fear of punishment, only the awareness that everything I had been, everything I had done, was about to be understood in a way I could not control. And strangely, I did not want to control it, because I knew whatever came next would be true. And truth in that place was not something to fear. It was something to face. The being remained before me, unchanging, unmoving, and yet everything around it felt alive, as if the entire space existed because of it. I cannot tell you how long I was there, because again, time did not exist in the way we understand it. But I can tell you this, in that presence, I knew with absolute certainty I was standing before something that was not created, something that had always been, and something that was about to show me everything I needed to see. What came next was not just an encounter, it was a revelation, one that would change not only how I see the world, but why I was sent back to it. What happened next is the part I struggled the most to accept, even after I returned. Because everything I had experienced until that moment, the separation from my body, the tunnel, the being of light, it was beyond explanation, but it did not yet challenge the deepest foundations of what I thought I knew. This did. The presence before me did not change form in a physical way. There was no transformation like you would see in a film, no sudden appearance of a human figure. And yet, I knew, not guessed, not assumed. I knew with a certainty that did not come from logic. The being I stood before was Jesus Christ. I had never seen his face. I had never been taught to recognize him in this way. But the recognition did not come through sight. It came through truth. The kind of truth that does not ask to be believed, because it makes belief unnecessary. And in that moment, something within me responded without hesitation. I bowed, not because I was told to, not because I felt forced, but because every part of my existence understood that I was in the presence of something greater than anything I had ever known. Even without a body, I knelt. That is the only way I can describe it. A gesture of surrender, of recognition, of humility. And then he called my name, Ibrahim. There was no sound, no voice echoing in the space. And yet, it was clearer than any word I have ever heard. It was not heard with ears. It was known, directly, completely. In that moment, I understood something that no language can fully carry. Communication in that place does not travel. It does not move from one being to another. It simply exists, already complete. Before I could form a response, before I could even gather a thought, everything inside me was already open to him. There was nothing hidden, nothing I could protect, nothing I could explain. And yet, there was no fear, only a profound sense of being understood, not as a leader, not as a president, but as a human being, as a soul, stripped of all titles, all identities, all illusions. I wanted to speak, to ask questions, to understand why I was there, why I had been brought to this place. But before any of those questions could take shape, he responded, not with words, but with meaning. You are seen. That was the first thing I understood, not in a sentence, not as a phrase, but as a reality. Everything I had lived, everything I had struggled through, every moment of doubt, every decision I had questioned, it had all been seen. Nothing had been ignored. Nothing had been forgotten. And in that realization, something inside me broke. Not in pain, but in release. Because for the first time, I understood that nothing in my life had been invisible. Not to him. Then came something even deeper. You are not finished. Again, not spoken, but known. And with that understanding, a weight entered me, not a burden, but a responsibility. A realization that my life had not reached its end. That everything I thought had concluded on that floor, in that moment of gunfire, was not the final chapter. I did not want to return. I will say that clearly, because what I felt in his presence was beyond anything the world can offer. Peace that cannot be disturbed, clarity that cannot be questioned, truth that cannot be altered. There was no suffering there, no confusion, no division, only completeness. And for a moment, if moment even exists in that place, I desired to remain, to stay in that presence forever. But he knew that. Before I could even fully feel it, he understood. And then something changed again, not in him, but in me. I was about to be shown something, something I did not ask for, something I was not prepared to face. Because being seen is one thing, but seeing yourself with absolute truth is something else entirely. And that is what came next. My life, every moment of it, not as I remembered it, but as it truly was. What came next was not shown to me like a memory. It was not a sequence of images. It was not something I watched from a distance. I lived it again, all of it, at once. And yet, in a way I could understand, my life unfolded before me, not from my perspective, but from a truth I had never been able to access while I was alive. I saw the beginning, the year I was born, in the town of Bondakui. I saw the child I once was, not just what I remember, but what I had forgotten. The small moments, the quiet struggles, the things that seemed insignificant at the time, but carried weight I had never recognized. I saw my mother, not just as I knew her, but through her own experience. I felt her worries, her fears, the weight she carried in silence, the sacrifices she made that I had never fully understood, moments where she smiled for me while hiding her own exhaustion. I felt it, not as an observer, but as if it was my own. Then I saw my father, his efforts, his failures, his hopes for me that he never spoke out loud, the way he carried responsibility without showing weakness, the pressure that shaped him, and in turn shaped me. I saw things I had never noticed, things I had never thanked him for. And in that moment, I understood him completely. Then my life moved forward. School, struggle, ambition, the desire to rise beyond the limitations I was born into. But this time, I did not only see my own intentions, I saw how my actions affected others. Every word I had spoken, every decision I had made, every moment I thought was small, revealed its true impact. There was no hiding, no justification, no ability to explain, because the truth did not require explanation. It simply was. I saw moments where I believed I had done the right thing, but had unknowingly caused pain. I felt that pain, not as guilt, but as understanding. I saw moments where I had been impatient, moments where I had chosen pride over humility, moments where I had moved forward without seeing who I left behind. And I felt it all, every consequence, every ripple, not from my perspective, but from theirs. The people I had helped, the people I had hurt, the people I had forgotten. It was all there, clear, undeniable, complete. Then came the years that led me to power, the decisions, the strategies, the moments of leadership that shaped my path. I saw them again, But this time, without the influence of position or justification, power did not protect me in that place. It did not excuse me. It did not define me. It was simply another part of my life, subject to the same truth as everything else. I saw the coup, the rise, the responsibility placed on my shoulders, and I saw the people, the citizens, not as numbers, not as a population, but as individuals, each with their own struggles, their own hopes, their own expectations. I felt the weight of every decision I had made for them, not as policy, but as impact. And then something unexpected happened. I began to see moments I did not even remember. Small acts, quiet choices, things I had done without thinking, that had meaning far greater than I had ever realized. A word of encouragement, a decision that changed someone's path, a moment of kindness that I had forgotten, but they had not. And I understood something in that moment. Nothing is lost. Nothing is forgotten. Every action matters, not in the way we measure importance in the world, but in a way that cannot be ignored in truth. There was no judgment from him. That is important, because many people believe that such a moment would be filled with condemnation, but there was none. Only clarity, only understanding, only truth. And in that truth, I judge myself, not through shame, but through awareness. I saw who I had been, completely, without illusion, without defense, without excuse. And I understood something that changed me forever. We do not need to be judged by something external, because when we are faced with absolute truth, we become our own judgment, not to punish ourselves, but to understand, to see clearly, to recognize where we have aligned with truth and where we have not. The experience did not feel like hours, or minutes, or seconds. It simply happened, complete, total. And when it ended, I was no longer the same, because I had seen myself, not as I believed I was, but as I truly was. And that is something no human being can fully prepare for. But it was not over, because after I saw my life, I was about to be shown something even greater, something beyond me, beyond my story, beyond my country, beyond even the world I thought I understood. And that is when he revealed the truth about power, about Africa, and about forces I had only begun to glimpse while I was alive. After my life was shown to me in full clarity, there was no pause, no moment to rest in what I had just seen, because what came next was not about me anymore. It was about something much larger, something I had spent my life inside but had never fully understood. The space around me shifted, not like a place changing into another place, but like a layer being removed, revealing something that had always been there, hidden beneath what we call reality. And then I saw a map, not drawn, not static, alive. The continent of Africa appeared before me not as lines on paper, but as a living history unfolding all at once. I saw time move across it, not in a straight line, but all at once. Past, present, and something beyond what we call the future, existing together. Borders appeared, then disappeared. Changed, redrawn, reshaped. I saw lands divided, not by nature, but by decisions, by hands that did not belong to the people who lived there. I saw resources, gold, minerals buried deep within the earth, but I did not just see them. I saw them being taken, over and over again, for more than 100 years. I saw ships, trains, machines, extraction without balance, without return. And I saw the people, the ones who lived above those resources, still struggling, still lacking, still being described by the world as behind. And in that moment, speech, no education, no political discussion had ever fully revealed to me. Poverty was not always an accident. In many cases, it was maintained, not always through force, but through systems, through structures, through decisions made far away that continued to shape the lives of those who had no voice in them. I saw moments in history I had studied, but never truly seen. Colonization, agreements, conflicts, not as isolated events, but as part of a pattern that repeated, shifted, adapted, but never fully ended. And then I saw something even deeper. The forces behind those events, not individuals, not names, but influences. movements, intentions, things that operated beyond the surface of politics. Because what I was being shown was not just history, it was the reality behind history. I saw coups, governments rising and falling, leaders gaining power and losing it, sometimes by their own actions, sometimes by something else. And I understood something that unsettled me. The struggle was not only physical, it was not only economic, it was not only political, it was also spiritual. There were forces that thrived on division, on confusion, on distraction. For generations, people had been separated by borders, by language, by belief, by identity. And while they remained divided, they remained weaker, not as individuals, but as a collective. And I saw how easily attention could be redirected, how quickly people could be made to focus on each other instead of what was shaping their reality from behind. Conflict, mistrust, narratives, all feeding into a cycle that kept the same patterns alive. And then something shifted again. The map did not disappear, but it changed. I saw moments where unity appeared, where people stood together, where awareness grew, where truth began to surface. And in those moments, everything changed, even if only for a short time. I saw what Africa could be, not in imagination, but in potential. A continent not defined by what had been taken from it, but by what it still carried. Strength, resilience, resources, and something even greater, identity. But that identity had been blurred, distorted, redirected for so long that many no longer recognized it. And then I understood something that I cannot ignore. The battle is not only for land, or wealth, or power. It is for awareness, for understanding, for truth. Because once people see clearly, they can no longer be guided the same way. And that changes everything. I did not feel anger. That is important. Because what I saw could easily lead to anger. But that was not what I felt. I felt clarity, responsibility, and something else, something I had not expected. Hope. Because even within everything I was shown, nothing was fixed. Nothing was final. Everything was still moving, still changing, still open. And then his presence made something clear to me, not through words, but through understanding. What I had just seen was not meant to make me react. It was meant to make me understand, because understanding is the beginning of change, and change is what comes next. But before I could fully absorb what I had been shown, there was one more truth I needed to face. A truth that would challenge not just how I see the world, but how many people see themselves. And when it was revealed, I understood why I had been brought there. Because this message was not only for me, it was for millions, and it would shock many who hear it. After everything I had been shown the truth about my life, the hidden layers of history, the patterns shaping nations, I believed I had reached the limit of what I could understand. I was wrong, because what came next was not about systems, or governments, or even continents. It was about identity, not the identity we claim, but the one we have forgotten. His presence did not change. The light remained constant, but the focus shifted. And suddenly, I was no longer looking at maps, or history, or events. I was seeing people, faces, generations, millions of them, across time, across continents, and I recognized them. Not individually, but collectively. Black men, black women, children, ancestors, descendants. A people whose story I had lived inside, but had never fully seen from this perspective. And then I understood something that struck deeper than anything before. They have forgotten who they are. Again, not spoken in words, but known with absolute clarity. At first, I resisted that understanding, because from where I came, we had not forgotten. We remembered struggle. We remembered survival. We remembered resilience. But then, I saw deeper. What had been forgotten was not suffering. It was identity beyond suffering. For generations, black people had been taught who they were by others, defined by history, but not always by truth, reduced to labels, to categories, to narratives that emphasize pain, but rarely purpose. I saw how identity had been shaped, not always through force, but through repetition, through systems, through stories told so often that they became accepted as reality. And I saw something else. Division. Not just between nations, but within the same people, separated by language, by borders, by belief, by experiences, even by success and failure. And as long as that division remained, something greater remained out of reach. Because unity is not just physical. It is awareness. It is recognition. It is understanding who you are beyond what you have been told. And then something shifted. The images changed. I saw moments where that awareness returned. Not everywhere, not always, but in flashes, in individuals, in communities, in movements. Moments where people remembered something deeper than history, something beyond circumstance. And in those moments, everything changed. Not instantly, not completely, but enough to show what was possible. And then the understanding became even clearer. Black people were never meant to be defined by limitation. They were not created to remain in struggle. They were not designed to be less. There was something within them, something carried across generations that had been obscured, not erased, but hidden, distorted, redirected. And when that is hidden long enough, it begins to feel like it never existed, but it does. It always has. And then I understood the part that many will struggle to accept. They are not victims. That realization did not deny suffering. It did not ignore history. It did not erase injustice, but it revealed something deeper. Victimhood, when it becomes identity, limits what is possible, because it keeps a person focused on what has been done to them instead of what they are capable of becoming. And that is where the shift must happen. Not by ignoring the past, but by refusing to be defined by it. And then came the part that shook me the most. When they awaken, the world will change. Not in a way of dominance, not in a way of control, but in a way of balance, of correction, of truth. Because awareness changes everything. And when a people who have been divided begin to see clearly, they cannot be guided the same way. They cannot be controlled the same way. They cannot be limited the same way. And that does not just change them, it changes the world around them. I did not feel pride. That is important. Because this was not about elevation over others. It was about alignment with truth. A truth that does not belong to one group, but has been forgotten by many. And in that moment, I understood why this message would shock people. Because it challenges narratives that have existed for generations. It asks people to look beyond what they have been told, beyond what they have accepted, beyond what feels comfortable. And that is not easy. But truth is not meant to be comfortable. It is meant to be seen. And once it is seen, it cannot be unseen. I realized then, this was not just information. This was responsibility. Because a message like this is not meant to stay hidden. It is meant to be shared. Not to create division, but to remove it. Not to elevate one above another, but to remind everyone of what has been forgotten. And yet, even after this, there was more. Because understanding the past and identity is not enough. There is also the future, and what I was about to see was something that no leader, no nation, no system can ignore. A warning, clear, unavoidable, and still not fixed. Because even what is coming can change if humanity chooses differently. After the message about identity settled within me, there was no sense of pause, no moment to rest. Because what I was about to see was not about the past. It was about what is coming. And what is coming is not fixed. That is the first thing I understood. Nothing I was shown was absolute. Nothing was guaranteed. Everything depended on choice, on awareness, on what humanity decides to do. From this moment forward, the space around me shifted again. The light did not fade, but it changed in depth, as if layers of reality were opening one after another. And then I saw the world, not as we see it on maps, not divided by borders, but as a living system, connected, interdependent, fragile. I saw nations, cities, people moving through their lives, unaware of what was unfolding beneath the surface. And then the first wave of images came. Conflict, not isolated, not contained, spreading. More than a dozen nations, different regions, different reasons, but the same pattern, tension rising, until it could no longer be controlled. And when it broke, it did not stay where it started. It moved, expanded, connected to other conflicts, like a chain reaction. I saw leaders making decisions, some out of fear, some out of pressure, some out of miscalculation, and those decisions carried consequences far beyond what they intended. War is never as contained as people believe. It does not stay within borders. It does not follow rules. It spreads through economies, through supply chains, through human lives, and that is what I saw next. The global economy under strain, not collapsing all at once, but weakening. Systems that people trusted beginning to fail. Not completely, but enough to create instability. Prices rising, resources becoming harder to access, communities feeling pressure they were not prepared for. And as that pressure increased, so did uncertainty, fear, division. Because when people feel unstable, they look for something to hold on to. And if they cannot find clarity, they hold on to whatever is closest, even if it leads them further from truth. I saw institutions, structures of power that had stood for decades, some of them beginning to crack, not because they were attacked directly, but because they could no longer support the weight placed upon them. Trust began to weaken, and when trust weakens, everything else follows. But that was not all, because alongside those images of conflict and instability, I saw something else. Moments of change, moments where people chose differently, where awareness interrupted the pattern, where individuals, communities, even leaders recognized what was happening and shifted direction. And in those moments, the outcome changed. Not instantly, not completely, but enough to alter the path. And that is when I understood something clearly. The future is not written. It is influenced constantly by choices, by awareness, by whether people continue to repeat what has always been done or choose something different. The warning I was being shown was not meant to create fear. It was meant to create awareness, because fear alone does not lead to change. Understanding does. And then I felt something that is difficult to describe, a balance. On one side, the continuation of the same patterns, leading to greater conflict, greater instability, greater division. On the other side, a shift. Not easy, not immediate, but possible. A movement toward understanding, toward responsibility, toward unity beyond surface differences. And the difference between those two paths was not controlled by a single nation or a single leader. It was influenced by people, individually, collectively. Every decision, every action, every moment of awareness, or lack of it. I realized then, this was not just a vision. It was a choice being placed before humanity. And I was being shown this for a reason. Not to predict, not to warn from a distance, but to speak, to share, to make people aware before it is too late to change direction. Because once certain lines are crossed, returning becomes more difficult. Not impossible, but harder. And that is why this matters. Because what is coming has already begun. In small ways, in subtle ways, but it is there. And the question is not whether change will happen. Change is already happening. The question is, in which direction? And that answer does not belong to me alone. It belongs to all of us. And then, after everything I had seen, everything I had been shown, there was one final moment, one final understanding, one final instruction, because I was not meant to stay. No matter how much peace I felt, no matter how much clarity I had received, I was being sent back. And what I was told next is the reason I am speaking to you now. After everything I had seen, the truth of my life, the deeper layers of history, the message about identity, and the warning about what lies ahead, there was a moment of stillness, not emptiness, not silence, but completion, as if everything that needed to be revealed had been placed before me. And yet, something remained. His presence did not change. It did not move. It did not fade. But the focus shifted again, from what I had been shown to what I was meant to do. And without words, without sound, the understanding came clearly. You are not finished. I had felt it before, but now it was undeniable. My life had not ended on that floor. It had been interrupted, paused, and now it was being continued. I did not respond immediately, not because I did not understand, but because I did. And that understanding brought something I had not felt until that moment. Reluctance. For the first time since I had left my body, I did not want what was coming next, because what I felt in that place cannot be compared to anything in the world of the living. There was no suffering, no confusion, no pressure, no division, only truth, only peace, only a completeness that removes every question a human mind could ever carry. And in that presence, I realized something that is difficult to admit. A part of me wanted to stay, to remain there, to let everything I had left behind remain behind, because returning meant something very different. It meant weight, responsibility, uncertainty, the same world I had just seen, with all its complexity, its conflict, its patterns. And I knew if I returned, I would not return the same. I would carry everything I had been shown, everything I now understood, and that is not a light burden. I did not need to ask the question. He already knew. And then the understanding came again, clear, unavoidable. Go back and speak the truth, not to gain power, not to control, not to convince, but to speak, to reveal, to make known what had been hidden or ignored. Because truth, once spoken, cannot be unheard. It can be rejected, it can be questioned, but it cannot disappear. And that is where responsibility begins. I realized then, this was not a choice in the way we understand choice. I could resist, I could hesitate, but the purpose had already been given. And purpose, when it is revealed at that level, does not leave room for avoidance. It becomes part of you. I felt something within me shift. Acceptance. Not because it was easy, but because it was true. I understood that everything I had experienced was not for me alone. It was meant to be carried back, shared, delivered, not perfectly, not completely, because no human language can fully contain what I had seen, but enough to begin something, to open something, to awaken something. And then something else happened. The peace I felt did not disappear, but it changed. It no longer surrounded me in the same way. It became something I carried instead of something I was inside. And with that shift, I knew the moment had come. There was no countdown, no signal, no warning, only a sudden, undeniable pull, stronger than anything I had felt before. Not forward, not deeper, but back, away from that place, away from that presence. And for the first time since I had left my body, I felt resistance, not from fear, but from desire, the desire to remain, to stay in that clarity, that peace, that truth. But it did not matter, because the pull was not something I could control. It was absolute, final. And as I began to move away, I understood something that stayed with me even after I returned. We are not here by accident. We are not placed into this world without purpose, even when we do not understand it, even when we question it. There is something we are meant to do, something we are meant to face, something we are meant to carry. And when that purpose is revealed, everything changes. Because you can no longer pretend you do not know. You can no longer return to ignorance. You can only move forward with what you have been given. The light did not disappear, but it moved further away. The presence remained, unchanging, watching, knowing, and then it was gone. Not because it ceased to exist, but because I was no longer there. I was being returned. And what awaited me was not peace. It was impact. A return to a body that had already been declared gone. A return to a world that had not changed, but that I would now see differently. And the moment of that return was not gentle. It was not gradual. It was a shock. a force, a sudden collision between two realities. And when it happened, everything came rushing back. The return did not feel like waking up. It did not feel like opening your eyes after sleep. It was violent, sudden, unavoidable. One moment I was moving away from that place of clarity, being pulled back with a force I could not resist. The next, I felt something I had not felt for what seemed like an eternity. Weight, not emotional weight, physical weight, the density of the body, the limitation of it, and then impact. It was as if I had been forced into something too small to contain me. Everything collapsed inward. Awareness, space, sensation compressed into a single point. And then, pain. For the first time since the gunshots, I felt it. Sharp, immediate, overwhelming. Not just in one place. Everywhere. My chest burned. My muscles felt like they were being torn apart. My lungs struggled. And then came the shock. A surge of energy that did not belong to me. It struck through my body like lightning. Uncontrolled. Violent. The defibrillator. I did not see it, but I felt it. That single moment when electricity forced my heart to respond was unlike anything I had ever experienced. My body yearked. Not by choice. Not by intention. But by force. And then darkness again. Brief. But present. And then another shock, another surge, another violent pullback into something I had already left. And suddenly, something happened. A rhythm, faint at first, then stronger. My heart, it was beating, slow, instable, but alive. I could not move. I could not speak. I could barely think. Because returning is not just about coming back. It is about remembering how to exist inside a body that feels foreign. Everything felt unfamiliar, heavy, limited. The clarity I had experienced was gone, not completely, but reduced, as if I had been taken from an open sky and placed inside a narrow room, and then sound. At first, it was distant, muffled, like voices coming from behind walls, but gradually, it became clearer. Shouting, urgency, commands. The voices of the doctors. I heard one of them cry out, not in fear, but in disbelief, as if something had happened that should not have been possible. Hands were on me, moving me, checking me, holding me in place. The world of the living rushed back all at once. And then, my eyes opened. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. Light entered. Harsh, different from the light I had just left. This light did not carry peace. It carried reality. And I saw them. The doctors, their faces, focused, shocked, relieved. One of them looked directly at me. And in his expression, I saw something I will never forget. He had expected me to be gone. Gone completely. And yet, I was looking back at him. Alive, but not the same. I tried to speak, but my body did not respond. My voice did not come, because returning is not instant. It is a process. The mind reconnecting, the body responding, everything trying to align again. But something was different. I knew it immediately, even in that fragile state, even without words, even without full awareness. I knew I had brought something back with me. Not physically, not visibly, but something real. Something that had changed how I see everything. The pain did not matter. The confusion did not matter. Because beneath it all, there was clarity. A quiet, unshakable knowing that what I had experienced was not a dream, not a hallucination, not the final moments of a dying mind. It was real. And I had been sent back, not randomly, not by chance. But for a reason. The doctors continued working, stabilizing me, calling for assistance. Their voices filled the room, but inside me, there was silence again. Not the silence of separation, but the silence of understanding. Because I knew this was only the beginning. Returning to the body was not the end of the experience. It was the start of something else. Something I would have to carry. something I would have to face, something I would have to speak. And as my breathing slowly stabilized, as my heart found its rhythm, as my body began to remember how to exist, one truth remained clear above everything else. I did not come back to live the same life. I came back to deliver something. And what came after that moment would prove it. When I fully returned to consciousness, the world felt smaller, not physically, but in meaning. Everything I had once considered important: status, control, influence, was still there. But it no longer held the same weight, because I had seen something beyond it. The first hours after my revival were not filled with clarity. They were filled with confusion. My body was weak. My thoughts were slow. The pain came and went like waves, reminding me that I was still bound to something fragile. But even in that condition, something inside me was steady, unmoved, clear. The doctors spoke around me. Their voices carried disbelief. They used words I later came to understand: impossible, unexplainable, miracle. They spoke about time, about how long my heart had stopped, about how the human body should not return after that, not without damage, not without consequence. But I was there, alive, aware, present. They called it a medical anomaly, a rare event, something science could not fully explain, but would try to categorize anyway. And I listened, not with disagreement, but with understanding, because what they saw was only part of what had happened. They saw the body, the heart stopping, the heart restarting, the procedures, the machines, the measurable. But what I had experienced existed beyond measurement. And that is something the world often struggles to accept. If it cannot be measured, it is questioned. If it cannot be repeated, it is doubted. If it cannot be explained, it is often dismissed. But truth does not require validation to exist. It only requires recognition. As the days passed, my strength returned. Slowly, not all at once. My body healed. My voice came back. My ability to stand, to move, to function, returned piece by piece. But my mind had already changed. I began to see everything differently. Conversations felt different. Decisions felt different. Even silence felt different. Because behind everything, there was now a deeper awareness. When people spoke to me, I no longer only heard their words. I sensed their intention, their fear, their uncertainty, their hope. Because I had seen what lies beneath the surface of human experience. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it. Power itself began to feel different. Before, it was something to manage, to protect, to use. Now, it felt like something temporary, something that exists within a much larger structure, a tool, not an identity. Because beyond titles, beyond positions, we are all the same. Human, limited, searching. I thought about the life I had seen, the moments I had relived, the truth I had faced about myself. And I understood something clearly. Leadership is not about control. It is about responsibility, not just for actions, but for impact, for the unseen consequences, for the people who will never stand in front of you, but will still be affected by what you decide. That awareness does not leave you. It follows you in every decision, in every moment. And then there was something else. The message, what I had been shown, what I had been told, what I had been sent back to speak. I could not ignore it. I could not set it aside, because it was not something I had imagined. It was something I had experienced fully, clearly, undeniably. At first, I questioned how to speak it, not out of fear, but out of understanding, because I knew not everyone would accept it. Some would doubt, some would reject, some would try to explain it away. That is natural. That is human. But I also knew something else. Silence was not an option, because the message was not given for comfort. It was given for awareness, and awareness requires expression. So I began to prepare, not a speech, not a statement, but a testimony, something real, something direct, something that does not try to convince, but simply reveals. Because truth does not need decoration. It does not need complexity. It only needs to be spoken. And then I understood something that brought everything together. What happened to me was not random. It was not an accident. It was not a coincidence of survival. It was intentional, not in the way humans plan events, but in a way that exists beyond human control. I had been allowed to see, to understand, to return, and now to speak, not as a politician, not as a figure of authority, but as a witness to something that exists beyond all of that. And that is why I stand here now, because what I have experienced is not meant to stay with me. It is meant to reach you, wherever you are, whoever you are, whatever you believe, because what comes next concerns all of us. And what I was shown does not end with warning. It ends with a choice, a message, simple, direct, and urgent. After everything I had seen, everything I had felt, everything I had come to understand, there was no longer any confusion about why I had been sent back. It was not to explain the experience. It was not to prove anything. It was to deliver a message, simple, clear, urgent, and meant for everyone, not just for Africa, not just for one group, but for the world. What I was shown was not complicated. It did not require education to understand. It did not require power to act upon. It required awareness and a decision. The message was this: awaken before it is too late. Not awaken in a physical sense, but in understanding, in awareness, in the way you see yourself and the world around you. Because much of what shapes human life is not visible on the surface. It exists in patterns, in habits, in beliefs that are accepted without question, in divisions that are maintained without understanding why. And as long as those patterns continue, the same outcomes will follow. Conflict, instability, suffering, repeated in different forms, but driven by the same roots. I was shown that humanity stands at a point where change is no longer optional. It is necessary, not because of one event, not because of one nation, but because of the direction everything is moving. And direction is determined by choice. The message was not about fear. It was not about predicting destruction. It was about responsibility, because every person carries influence, not always on a global scale, but within their own space, their family, their community, their decisions, and those small influences build into larger outcomes. People often believe that change must come from leaders, from governments, from systems. But what I understood is this: change begins where awareness begins. And awareness begins within the individual. You cannot create unity if you are divided within yourself. You cannot bring truth if you avoid it in your own life. You cannot expect the world to change while refusing to change how you see it. This is not about perfection. It is about direction, about recognizing what is real and aligning with it. The message was also clear about something many people misunderstand. Good and evil are not distant forces. They are present in choices, in action, in intention, every day, in every life, and those choices accumulate. They shape not only personal outcomes, but collective reality. That is why awareness matters, because without it, people act without understanding the impact of what they do. They follow patterns without questioning them. They repeat what has always been done, even when it leads to the same results. But when awareness enters, everything changes. Not instantly, not perfectly, but steadily. Because once you see clearly, you cannot continue the same way without knowing. And that knowledge creates responsibility. The message was not about religion, not about forcing belief, not about convincing anyone to follow a specific path. It was about truth, universal, unchanging, present, whether it is accepted or not. And that truth is this: you are more than what you have been told. Your life carries weight. Your actions matter. And the direction of the world is influenced by what you choose to do with that understanding. I was not told to persuade. I was not told to argue. I was told to speak, to share, to make it known. Because once something is known, it cannot be completely ignored. And that is where change begins. You may question this. You may doubt it. You may try to explain it in ways that make it more comfortable to accept or easier to dismiss. That is your choice. But I ask you something simple. Look at the world as it is. Look at the patterns. Look at what continues to repeat. And ask yourself, is it working? If the answer is no, then something must change. And that change begins with awareness, with truth, with the willingness to see beyond what has always been accepted. This is not about me. It never was. It is about what comes next for all of us. Because what is happening now is only the beginning. And what follows depends on what we choose to do from this moment forward. When I look back at everything that has happened, I no longer see my life as a sequence of events. I see it as a path that led me through struggle, through responsibility, through moments I believed I understood, only to bring me to a place where I realized how little I truly knew. And then I was shown, not everything, but enough to change how I see life, enough to change how I see people, enough to change how I see myself. I do not stand here as a man who has all the answers. I stand here as a man who has been given a glimpse of something greater than what we call reality and returned with the responsibility to speak. What I experienced was not meant to elevate me. It was meant to remind me, and through me, to remind others that life is not only what we see, that our actions carry more weight than we realize. That truth exists, whether we choose to face it or not. When I returned, I did not return to a different world. The same problems remained, the same conflicts, the same struggles, the same divisions. Africa is still facing its challenges. The world is still moving in directions that raise questions. And yet, something is different, because awareness changes how you see everything. And when enough people begin to see clearly, everything begins to shift. Slowly, quietly, but inevitably. I do not ask you to believe every word I have spoken. Belief is not something I can give you, but I do ask you to reflect, to look beyond what is easy, to question what has always been accepted, to examine your own life, not with judgment, but with honesty, because that is where change begins. Not in governments, not in institutions, but in individuals, in choices, in moments where you decide to act differently, even when it is difficult. I have seen what happens when we do not change. I have seen the direction things can go when awareness is ignored. And I have also seen that it does not have to be that way. There is still time. There is still possibility. There is still hope. But hope is not passive. It is not something that exists on its own. It is something that is created through action, through awareness, through the willingness to align with what is true, even when it challenges what we are used to. To those who are listening, especially those who have lived long enough to see patterns repeat across generations, you understand more than you may realize. You have seen change. You have seen consequences. You have seen what happens when truth is ignored and when it is faced. And that is why your awareness matters. Because you carry experience. And experience, when combined with truth, becomes wisdom. And wisdom is something this world needs now more than ever. To the people of Africa, we are not forgotten, even if it has felt that way. Even if history has tried to define us by limitation, we carry more than what has been taken from us. We carry identity, strength, purpose. And when we begin to see that clearly, everything changes. Not because someone gives it to us, but because it has always been there. To the world, we are more connected than we often realize. What happens in one place does not stay there. What we choose affects more than we see. And that is why awareness is not optional. It is necessary. Because without it, we repeat. With it, we transform. I did not return to live the same life. I returned to speak, to share, to remind. And now that I have done so, what happens next is not in my control. It belongs to you, to your choices, to your awareness, to what you decide to do with what you have heard. If this message has reached you, then it was meant to, not by chance, but because something within you is ready to hear it. And if that is true, then do not ignore it. Reflect on it, question it, but do not dismiss it without thought, because truth, once encountered, leaves something behind, and that something can grow quietly, slowly, but powerfully. Before I end, I want to leave you with something simple. Not a command, not an instruction, but a reminder. Choose awareness over ignorance. Choose unity over division. Choose truth, even when it is uncomfortable, because those choices shape more than you can see. And now, I leave you with these words. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, and what I have shared with you comes from truth as I have experienced it. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, and these words are not given lightly but carried from something beyond explanation. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, and I stand by what I have spoken, not for myself, but for what it may awaken in you. If this message has made you think, even for a moment, then hold on to that. And if you feel it is worth hearing again, or worth sharing, then let it reach others. Not for attention, but for awareness. Because sometimes, the smallest act of sharing truth can begin something far greater than we expect.